Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a question that's been around American politics for ages, it seems. Is America ready for a woman president? And we're diving into a really thought-provoking Washington Post article. It uses Kamala Harris's current campaign kind of as like a lens to examine this question.
Yeah, it's interesting because the article goes beyond just like the surface level.
Right.
It really digs into those like subtle and sometimes even subconscious biases that a lot of voters, I think, still have about women, actually leading the country.
Absolutely. And they actually start with this anecdote about this construction worker from Nevada, Sarah White, and she initially, she was like, there's no way I'd vote for a woman president. But then as she started hearing more from Harris, her perspective actually began to change a little bit.
That's a good point.
And I think that really highlights just how complex this whole issue is.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it's not just a simple like yes or no.
It's not black or white. No. It's a great illustration, I think, of this likability tightrope that women in politics are often forced to walk.
Yeah.
They have to project strength and competence, but then if they're seen as too assertive, they can be labeled as like unlikable or bossy.
Yeah.
Labels that you really don't hear attached to men in leadership roles.
No, it's definitely a double standard. And the article goes on to explore some of the actual research about gender bias in elections. And some of it's really interesting. Like, did you know that studies show that women actually often need to be significantly more qualified than their male counterparts to even be considered for the same job? Like, it's this concept they call the resume bar.
It really is. It's like this invisible hurdle they have to clear
Yeah.
that men don't even have to think about. And then even when they do clear it, they're held to this like completely different standard. Gallup polls, for example, consistently show that while the majority of Americans say they would vote for a qualified woman, there's still this like noticeable gap compared to how they view male candidates.
It's so interesting. And then they just throw in these quotes from this focus group with anti-Trump Republicans.
Oh, yeah.
One woman just flat out said, women shouldn't be president because they think with their hearts. And then a man in the group expressed concern about a woman having access to nuclear codes during that time of the month.
Wow.
It's like, are these for real? Those are some pretty extreme examples.
Those are extreme, but I think they do offer this like really fascinating glimpse into the very real sexism that still exists, even in 2024. Which is just mind-blowing to me. It really highlights just how much harder a woman has to work to convince some voters that she's actually capable of holding the highest office.
It's true. So how is Harris approaching this particular challenge?
Yeah.
The article talks about how she's really deliberately showcasing her experience as a prosecutor and her expertise in foreign policy.
Yeah.
Almost like she's trying to counter, those stereotypes of women being too soft.
Oh, it's definitely strategic.
Yeah.
By highlighting her toughness and her ability to make those difficult decisions, she's directly confronting that perception that women just lack what it takes to be commander-in-chief.
Right.
And we've seen this strategy before, too. I mean, she's not the only one doing this. We've seen women leaders all over the world demonstrate that a female president is not some, a radical concept.
That's true. And let's not forget that things have shifted since Hillary Clinton's run in 2016. We've had the Women's March, the Me Too movement, a record number of women in Congress. It feels like there's been some progress made, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The article acknowledges that, too. Seeing more women in these leadership positions, not just in politics, is definitely changing attitudes for the better.
For sure.
But it's crucial to remember that progress doesn't mean the fight is over. Sexism is so deeply ingrained and it takes so much sustained effort to actually dismantle those structures.
Right. The article brought in some different viewpoints, too, from people who responded to the piece. Some people argued that it's actually political party affiliation that really determined how people vote more than gender.
That's a good point. Party loyalty is strong.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that it plays a big part in how people cast their ballots.
Absolutely. Other people pointed out that they saw Harris as a much stronger candidate than Clinton because of both her personality and her more progressive policy positions.
Right. It's fascinating, how individual perceptions and interpretations can be so different, even when we're looking at the exact same candidate. It shows just how complex these evaluations can be. I mean, there's no single factor
Right.
that determines how a voter is going to ultimately decide. But now let's maybe zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture.
What's really fascinating is that the article also talks about this idea of the ethical pedestal that women in politics are often put on. Like they're expected to be more honest or trustworthy than their male counterparts.
Oh, Okay, so that sounds like a good thing, right? Well, on the surface, maybe. But the article argues that it can actually create this, like, dangerous double bind. Because if a woman doesn't somehow manage to live up to these impossibly high expectations, she can be judged more harshly than a man for making the same mistakes.
Oh, wow. So they're almost being set up for failure then.
Yeah, in a way, yes. It really limits their options. Like, if they come across as too tough, they're seen as unlikable. But if they show vulnerability, then they're seen as weak, you
Hmm.
know? It's this constant pressure to navigate these really narrow expectations that men don't have to deal with in the same way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it makes you wonder how many other talented women are out there who might want to have a career in politics,
Right.
but see all of these hurdles and decide it's just not worth it.
Exactly. And that's a loss not just for those women, but for our democracy as a whole. We need these diverse voices, these different perspectives in leadership. And when these barriers exist, it hurts us all.
It does. So
Yeah.
the article brings up a really crucial question, you know, are voters actually evaluating Harris based on her qualifications and her policies, or are those perceptions being clouded by these biases that we've been talking about?
Right.
Like, if she were a man with that exact same resume, would people judge her any differently?
It's a tough question to answer, but it is one we should all be asking ourselves.
Yeah.
Are we as a society truly evaluating these candidates based on merit, or are we letting these unconscious biases shape our opinions?
Yeah. It's almost like we need to all take a step back and examine our own assumptions.
Yeah.
Like, what are the qualities that we're really looking for in a leader? Where did those ideas come from? And are they based on actual evidence, or are they based on these outdated gender stereotypes?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not just about electing a woman president. It's about creating this culture where gender isn't this barrier to leadership, where everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed based on their own abilities, not based on, these preconceived notions about what a leader is supposed to look like.
That's a really good point. The article doesn't really offer like any easy answers, but it makes you think for sure. It challenges us to really look beyond just the surface and question those biases that we might not even realize we have.
Yeah. And it reminds us that this fight for equality is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We're not going to change things overnight, but it's so important to keep pushing for progress, to
Mm.
challenge people when they say things that are harmful and to celebrate the women who are breaking down these barriers and making a path for others. Now let's shift gears for a second and consider how America's experience stacks up against the rest of the world.
It's interesting because the article points out that the U.S. is actually like way behind other countries when it comes to having women in the highest office.
Mm.
They talk about, how like nations in Europe and South America, even Asia,
Hmm.
have had women presidents and prime ministers for decades now.
Right.
So why is it that America seems to be so stuck on this?
Yeah, it's a question that's really puzzled political scientists, for years. The article kind of suggests that maybe it's something about America's unique history and our political system that's created these obstacles.
What kind of obstacle?
Well, one thing is that there are some pretty deep-seated expectations about gender roles, that whole idea that, like, women are nurturing and men are leaders.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful stereotype that's been reinforced, by the media and just the way our society is structured for generations. And it makes it harder for people to see women as these credible leaders, especially, in fields like politics, which have always been dominated by men.
Yeah, it's almost like there's this subconscious association between leadership and being masculine.
Exactly. And that is a tough thing to overcome. But the article also reminds us that change is possible. Think back to Sarah White, the construction worker.
Yeah.
We talked about her earlier. Her initial skepticism, totally changed after she heard Harris speak.
It's a really encouraging example, right?
It is.
It shows that these beliefs can change.
It really highlights the importance of representation.
Mm.
The more we see women in positions of power, the more normal it starts to seem. It really helps to chip away at those old stereotypes, and I think it opens up so many possibilities for the future.
That's a good point. But it's not just about changing individual minds, right?
Right.
The article talks about this broader societal impact that having a woman president could have.
Absolutely. It's about way more than just having one person in office.
Yeah.
It's about creating this ripple effect that can actually transform, the whole political landscape. I mean, think about it. Having a woman in the Oval Office, I think, could lead to, more women actually running for office at every level, more women appointed to these key positions in government. It could actually shift the balance of power in a way that benefits everyone.
So it's about representation, but it's also about like systemic change too.
Exactly. It's about creating a future where we don't even have to talk about a candidate's gender.
Hmm.
You know, we're judging them just based on their qualifications and their vision, their ability to lead regardless of if they're a man or a woman.
Wow, that is a really powerful thought.
Yeah.
A future where somebody's gender is just irrelevant. But how do we even get there?
It's a journey. It's not a destination.
Hmm.
It takes all of us being aware of our own biases and challenging the people around us when they perpetuate these stereotypes and supporting women who are running for office and actually breaking down those barriers.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Hmm.
I think the takeaway is that the question isn't really just, is America ready for a woman president? It's, are we as individuals, ready to create a world where that question doesn't even need to be asked? And that's something I think we can all think about.
Hmm.
What does leadership really mean to you? What qualities do you value in a leader? And are those qualities really tied to gender, or is that just something we've been conditioned to think?
It's definitely a conversation that we all need to keep having. So, keep questioning things, keep exploring, and keep pushing for a future where we judge leadership by ability, not by gender.